Hi, I'm Karen K. Buckley, and I'd like to introduce you to my perfect heat-resistant template plastic. Inside the package, you're going to find 4 8.5 by 11 sheets of this plastic. So let me tell you all about it. It is really great when you're doing prepared edge applique, and that's what I use it for mostly, but I'm not saying you won't find some other uses. You probably will. It is writeable on both sides, which is fantastic. So no matter which side I write on, my lines are going to show. So that's one option for tracing it, is to use, I generally like to mark with just a pencil. I usually just use a mechanical pencil. You want to be careful with some of the techniques because some markers can smudge, but I find a pencil works every time, so that's what I tend to go for. It's also extremely easy to cut. Oh, can I back up for a second? Because I forgot to mention, instead of taking it and tracing your shapes onto the template plastic, you might instead prefer, I'm going to just slide one of my patterns in here so you can take a look. And I took this pattern and I wanted to transfer these shapes onto the plastic, and I could just trace them individually. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. But just so you know, you can take this pattern and put it into your copy machine, and it will, look how beautifully that came out. Just feeds right through, and then all your lines are transferred on there easily. If I was doing this, quite honestly, instead of, there would be a lot of wasted areas on here because of how the pattern is set up, I would have a copy of this made, and then I would cut out the shapes that I needed to make the templates and place those on a piece of paper. So that way I could copy just the shapes I needed on here and then not be wasting this. Okay, and the next thing you want to know about this, I already said it's very easy to cut. I do like to do my cutting with my multi-purpose scissors, and I tend to use either the 7.5, which are the ones with the pink handle, or I use the orange multi-purpose scissors, which are the 5. And either one of these are excellent for cutting into the plastic, and these blades just do not get dull. I've cut plastic, paper, all sorts of things, but I really love it for cutting through this heat-resistant plastic. So that's what I tend to use. And I do need, when I'm working on this, I have to set my iron so that it is on a medium dry heat. Because if I set my iron too hot, it will not melt this plastic, but it will warp it. So you want to be careful to use a dry, medium heat setting on your iron. Okay, now I did just a tiny little bit ahead of time. I'm going to slide this in so you can see. I tend to like just to scrap a fabric on the work area, so because I'm going to use some magic sizing. And so I'll just show you, I like magic sizing, and I have the lid off of it right now, but you can sort of see the can so you know what it looks like. And then I'm going to spray it into its very own little lid, or you can get another container certainly, but I just spray it right into the lid that comes with it. It'll come out very foamy, and then within a couple of seconds, or maybe 30 to a minute at the most, it's going to go into a completely clear liquid. So you could use it as the foam or the liquid. It will work either way. But the concept, if you will, I made this, I traced this with my pencil, and then I cut it out with the multi-purpose scissors, so I have what I think is a pretty good edge. However, I do find, especially on outside curves, that sometimes when I'm doing my cutting, I'm not getting as smooth of a cut as I thought that I did. So I generally take my fingers over the edge like this. For example, I can feel I have a little bit of a bump, tiny little bump right here. And you will want to maybe have an emery board close by. So I take this, and anywhere I have a little tiny bump, I'll just rub the emery board across that. I have to rub it. I got another little bump right here. It's typical on outside curves, so you want to work your fingers around and just sort of check them. Sometimes you can just really easily see them, and then other times you just want to run your finger over there because you can't see them very well, but boy, you can feel them with your finger. So once I had that smooth, I placed that down on the back of a big piece of fabric, and then I positioned this on there and I simply traced around it. If I had more than one of these, I would layer my fabric when I'm cutting. And when I do my cutting of the fabric, single or multi-layered, I prefer to use the Karen K. Buckley, either the 7.5-inch micro serrated scissors or the blue handled, which are the 6-inch. So I'm going to use one of the two of these when I do my cutting. If I have more layers, I'll tend to go to the purple because it's a longer blade and it's easier for me to get through more layers if that's what I have to cut. I don't cut, if I have several of a shape, I don't just cut one at a time, unless I'm fussy cutting something, of course. But otherwise, I like to layer the fabric and cut. So I've already done that step just to save us a little time here. Then I'm going to place this on, I like to put a scrap of fabric down on the ironing surface because otherwise I can get a little bit of buildup of sizing. I never get buildup on the actual finished piece, but I was sometimes getting on my ironing board, and I do not get it on the base of the iron because that's a question I've been asked repeatedly. And then I'm going to slide my iron in here. I have it on a dry medium heat. And you can sort of check to see what you have. In the early years, I used Q-tip to apply the sizing, but I found I definitely preferred stencil brush for this step. And I found when I have a shape such as this, I like to start on the inside curve first, and then I'll come in and do the outside. So I'm going to just move my sizing over to this side. I dip my brush into the sizing, and then I'm going to paint one of the inside curves. And then I'm going to bring the front end of my iron in, and I'm going to wiggle that in a little bit. Now, what you're going to find is, if that doesn't want to push in easily, then you're going to clip it. But I just took and gave that a nice little shove, and it pushed it right up over on there. Sometimes it depends where you hit the grain and the bias of the fabric. You may or may not have to do clips. So let's say that I'm coming in this section, I wet the next inside curve, and then I push that, I wiggle my iron in a little bit because the moisture opens that fabric. So it allows it to kind of push in easily. If the fabric was dry, that would never work. And then I'm going to carefully lift. And I'm going to paint the next inside. Let's say that I find it's not turning over well for me. Then I like to come in with, I usually use the Karen K. Buckley's 4-inch, the smaller scissors. And if you look, I'm going to clip. I usually do like 3 clips in here, but don't clip the whole way up to your plastic. You want to stay a couple of threads away. And then I'll usually take my brush and just give it a little lift to help it get started, and then bring the front end of that iron in. And then it will push very easily in over that edge. So you'll be the judge whether you need to clip or whether you don't. Okay, we're going to keep working our way around. And this is the last inside curve. And one of the things that you're probably noticing, but I didn't say out loud, is when I push the seams up over, I do have to allow the iron to sit in place for maybe 10 to 15 seconds just to dry the sizing. Once I've made my way around and I have all the inside curves done, now I'm going to come and start working on the outside. So I take a little bit of moisture on that curve, and then you want to use the side of the iron and just sort of push that right up over and stay right on the seam allowance on an outside curve. Don't bring the iron in very far onto your shape. And then I'm just going to keep picking it up, wetting that curve with a little bit of moisture. And my opinion is strongly, do not clip an outside curve. I found that it does not benefit me to do that. I get a much, much better curve if I do not clip it. And I'm going to come in just with the side of the iron and leave the iron pretty close, like I said, mostly just out on that seam allowance. I found if I brought the iron in too far, sometimes I created some little pleats down further in the fabric. And so I found if I just let it sit right out around that outer curve, that I tend to get a nice smooth curve. Okay. Like I said, you gotta let it dry. And so you have to be a little bit patient here. I will also say while I'm finishing these outside curves, I use this same method whether I hand or I machine applique. I like my edges turned under for both. And so obviously then just my needle and thread changed. But the process of how I prepare my fabric does not change. Okay, one more to do. And then check it before we pull this out. But I just want to make sure I repeat. Inner points will need to be clipped. Inner curves may or may not. It depends how deep they are. You'll decide that. But outside curves I think should never be clipped when you're doing this. Okay, and then I like to pick it up, and you can see it's going to form beautifully right up over these edges. But one of the things that I will do is I usually take my fingers and I check these edges. So I'm just looking around visually to make sure everything looks okay. Because one of the things I want you to understand is that if there's an edge on here, maybe it got caught under the iron a little funny, because that can happen and you don't see it because it's under the iron. But let's just pretend that right here on this curve that I wasn't completely satisfied with the way it looked. I can come in, lay that back down, re-wet that, take my finger and push it out, and I can re-iron it. And I'm not exaggerating. I can have that fixed in 20 seconds. So it's not a big deal to me if it happens. Just know that it will happen every once in a while, but it's extremely easy to repair. All right, let's flip it over. Everything looks excellent. Now, I'm going, just so you know, it's not once and done. Once you make the template, you can just keep reusing it. And then it's very simple. I just reach in and pop it out. You don't have to be really delicate with it because the edges are ironed so beautifully that, you know, it's just popped it out and it's all ready to go. And then I put that down on my background fabric. Some people prefer to pin, some people glue, however you want to put it on there, and then you're ready to do your stitching. I've made thousands of shapes using this heat-resistant template plastic, and you are going to love working with this for your applique as well. So remember, you're getting 4 8.5 by 11 sheets inside, and it's the Karen K. Buckley's Perfect Heat-Resistant Template Plastic. Have fun making templates. Thanks.